Okay, so good afternoon again, everybody. Good afternoon, Daniel. Welcome.
Thank you, Jerome.
Thanks to you, Daniel. It's a pleasure to receive you today. Hello, everybody. I am Jérôme Girard, and I am the founder of InnoIT Consulting. First of all, we hope you are safe, and also your family as well. InnoIT is an IT and digital consulting company with a disruptive position in the market. Our goal is to know the best IT talent in France and in Spain in order to manage his career path, to give them the best advices for their professional career. We work with our consultant as a football scout does with a football player, or as an agent can do with movie actors. We launched a company almost 10 years ago in France and 4 years ago in Spain. We have a global team of 350 people in these two countries, and currently we are more than 45 people in Spain. Today, I'm very happy to receive to Daniel and to be here with you. We have more than 50 people attending this webinar, people from Barcelona, from Madrid, but also from Brazil and from the US. Daniel, I confirm that we have a lot of friends. As you know, today we are going to speak about security. We are going to deal with security best practices for Amazon Cloud Accounts. So we all know that it became a big challenge. And in this session, we try to do an overview of security best practices. We'll also discuss about key services to use to facilitate the secure consumption of cloud services. So today I'm very pleased to receive to Daniel Vauchou, our speaker. Daniel is principal security architect at Accenture. He is a hands-on cybersecurity strategist with more than 50 years experience, securing company of all sizes, from startup to very large corporation. Daniel is passionate about security topics, including identity, cloud environments, and application. We will have a 1 hour webinar with a presentation of 40-50 minutes, and then a moment for Q&A question, but also we're going to stop at half presentation to deal with some first question. Please write your question on Zoom, on the wall, preguntas y respuestas. Take an account that we're going to record the chat, and then we'll send you the slides on the video on Meetup. And for last, I want to let you know about our next webinar in May. On May 19, we're going to speak about aplicación web progresiva. It will be in Spanish. Cómo tu negocio puede vender más con aplicación web progresiva. And on May 17, we're going to speak about technology and culture. We're going to study the case of WeFox, which is top insurtech unicorn worldwide company. And we're going to speak about continuous deployment journey and mindset. So now, Daniel, feel free to start. And thank you again to all for being here and enjoying the webinar.
Yep, thank you guys. We appreciate your time. I know everybody's busy these days, so hopefully you're gonna get what you expected out of this call. We're gonna cover pretty much the basics for securing AWS Cloud Accounts. But if you want us to go deeper on a particular subject, please add it to the questions and answers, and we can address it. So we reserve, we think, sufficient time to address a lot of the questions, and hopefully you will not hesitate on asking them. Okay, so assuming everybody had some exposure to AWS, already had worked and created some accounts and worked in AWS before, what are the typical things that you would want to do as soon as you provision that account? And then this depends heavily on your company and what it does and your maturity level. But the idea is to adopt from the beginning the cloud principle. So that means you should not do changes by hand in your accounts. You should implement some sort of pipeline. You should have infrastructure as a code. You should use templates like Terraform to manage your estate. And as much as possible, you should avoid spinning up traditional servers because they're hard to maintain. You're gonna have to patch them. You're gonna have to manage software dependencies and all that. And if you can avoid it, if you can use serverless, if you can use containers, by all means, try that. And AWS, just like the other cloud vendors, make it quite easy to consume serverless services, and they try to entice you to go that direction. Another thing that is very exciting with the advent of cloud services is the ephemeral immutable constructs. So the idea that you don't have to patch, for example, your containers, you just let them expire, and then you provision new containers that have any necessary patching as part of the pipeline. So you don't have to go manually or to any systems and actually perform patching. So one thing that a lot of people, I think, do, and it's probably a mistake, is to create one AWS account and do everything in that account. So AWS matured this concept of organizations, and they have a whole list of best practices on how to use multi-account strategies. And I recommend you check that out because it's really important, and it kind of sets the scene for you to be protected in a way that even if an entire account is misused or deleted, you don't run out of business, right? You still have backups, you still have other accounts that can help you restore your business. And one key and important concept once you move to cloud is that pretty much everything revolves around identity. So since you now consume some services that somebody else hosts for you, typically your key control is how you provision, maintain, and govern access to these services. That you know how to provision identities, you know how to manage the permissions, and you have a tight control over it because it's really your best chance at retaining governance of what's going on and maintaining it securely. And this is not easy. Like maintaining permissions, ensuring that you apply the least access privilege, it's kind of tedious, and so it requires practice. And the good thing is there's a lot of services, both cloud native in AWS as well as open source and obviously commercial as well, to help you with this. But this is, if there's anything that you're getting out of this session, the fact that you need to pay attention to your identity, the IAM, in AWS is it. And some good practices is, for example, to not trust password. So ensure that you have multi-factor authentication. Ensure that you put some conditions for people accessing your assets. So, for example, there's the assume role that you can force both humans and machines to perform to get any sort of elevated privilege in your accounts, and you can put conditions there. You can put MFA conditions. You can put, anything from the source account, source IP address, time. I think even time of day. So kind of look at that, because it allows you to have a more granular way by which you can permit access and apply conditions. And then ensure that you have strong passwords, that you rotate them, you have a password policy in place, which is available with AWS, and that you also have a process to enforce the rotation of any sort of secrets you might have, including the access keys. And then AWS does a good job at providing you best practices, which I attached here. So once you have populated your IAM, you have identities, you have permissions, then really the hard part starts, which is how to maintain this, how to ensure that you don't over provision, how to ensure that you can prune those permissions which are stale, which are not being used, or which are being abused. So there's a bunch of services that you can use directly with AWS. There's one called Trusted Advisor. There's another one called Credential Report, where you can see, who connected, who changed their password, and a lot of details that can help you set your policy and also see whether your policy is being applied correctly. There's also some cool features around, for example, for permission, you can see the last activity for a role or a group, and you can see whether the permissions are in use or not. So you can see that whether a particular role has access or not, S3 bucket or the AC2. And this can help you prune those permissions that are not being used, so that you can enforce better the least access privilege. And there are also like Access Analyzer, CloudTrail, which are the logs, and all of this can help you figure out whether you're over provisioning permissions, and which are those permissions that might be dangerous, and you should be removing them. A really great tool that I like a lot is SkyArk. It's basically a bunch of scripts that run on your account, and they can tell you whether you have admins in an account, and then they define what is an admin and what permissions they qualify as admin, and also the so-called shadow admins, which is a pretty interesting concept. A shadow admin is an identity that has permissions, sufficient permissions to elevate their rights to an admin or near admin role, and it's pretty interesting to use it. I would recommend you to run this, because it might surprise you. You might see that because some Lambda function has access to all your S3 buckets, and you might, in those S3 buckets, you might have your Terraform templates. That means your Lambda has access to all your account, because it can modify the Terraform templates and run whatever it needs. And there are all sorts of situations like this where you wouldn't expect, but because of these implications, you might see that you over provision permissions. The best practice is to use standardized roles and to assign permissions to roles rather than directly to identities. And there are a set of commands which, if provision as permissions, might allow identities to escalate privilege. And there's a really cool list here. And if you kind of want to go on this kind of deeper layer, I recommend you to follow the Rhino Security Labs. They have some pretty cool examples, and they kind of explain why this can be used to escalate privilege and so on. And then finally, a really nice service that's being added by AWS is the concept of service control policy, which you apply at the organization level. These are quite powerful because it allows you to ban commands or entire services from being used in your organization. So for example, you can decide that you're not going to use EC2 instances. So you can ban the any sort of EC2 commands and in effect prevent EC2 service from being run on all your accounts. You can also ban, for example, the usage of regions that you don't have, that your business doesn't use, so that you ensure that if a malicious actor gets access to your account, they don't hide, for example, they don't spin up a bunch of EC2 instances to mine cryptocurrency, and because they put it in a different region that you don't monitor, you won't see it until it's too late and your bill is ridiculously high. You can also prevent the disablement of key security functions. For example, CloudTrail, Guard Duty, we're going to talk about in a minute. So that kind of gives you a really good control of this should never happen, and you can never disable this. That kind of approaches you can codify with service control policy. And then one interesting other use is you can prevent data deletion. So if you know that there's some some accounts where data should never be deleted, you can codify that with service control policies. All right, do we have any questions so far? All right, I don't see any. So guys, feel free to ask questions along the way. So I'll stop from time to time, and we can discuss those. So as mentioned, this is kind of only touching a bit the high level, but if you want, we can deep dive in a particular subject. All right. So assuming you're doing your IAM right as best as you can, there are a number of tools that you can also leverage to ensure that whatever objects you're creating in your account, they are compliant with your policy. And ideally, you would configure these objects, by code with something like Terraform. But this service would be something like AWS config would allow you to enforce compliance rules, which will trigger every time an object is created and doesn't have the necessary settings that you define. So, for example, you can define that security groups should not have SSH or remote desktop configured from 0000. That's one of the controls. Or that any S3 bucket that you create must be encrypted. That some objects that you create must not be internet public, might not be internet facing. All of that can be codified with AWS config, and you can also centralize it into the results can be centralized in let's say, for example, a security account, which is part of your organization, where you put all the sensitive data, and you can take some actions. So you can fully automate this from AWS config results. You can trigger some functions that can either configure the object to a secure state, so like add encryption to an S3 bucket, or they can remove the offending configuration. So, for example, they can remove the line in a security group that allows SSH or remote desktop from the internet. And so I recommend you to look at AWS config. It's really powerful. and also to ensure that when you want to consume objects, that you are defining the secure state for these objects, and then you also codify it on your with your infrastructure as a code pipeline, but you also configure the detections in AWS config, and then you determine whether you want to be detection only or also prevent, which means based on the config findings, it will trigger an action to remediate. Some important specific compliance control is the S3 public bucket toggle. So public S3 buckets was a pretty big issue until recently, and it was not easy to figure out back in the day if an S3 bucket is public or not. Because the bucket could have been private, but objects inside it could have been public. So it was a quite difficult. So after some very visible and publicized leaks on S3 buckets, AWS changed this. So now you have an account level toggle where you can decide whether you want to allow at all buckets in this account to be public or not. And this is quite powerful because typically the approach should be none of your buckets should be public. And if you have some content that should be public, you either create it in a separate account, or you put something like CloudFront in front of it, and then CloudFront will authenticate to S3 bucket and will serve public content. So you might have, for example, static content for your website. And this way, you will prevent, by using this toggle, any sort of S3 buckets that shouldn't be public becoming public because of some misconfiguration or some other error. This is a screenshot from the toggle itself, and I recommend you to spend some time on this to understand why it works. The reason, for example, the last item on the list is off is because if you enable this, it will prevent you from accessing buckets cross accounts. So if you have multiple accounts, the last setting will not allow you to access from account A a bucket in account B. So you probably want that off if you have multiple accounts, and cross-account data is something you do, but the rest probably should be on in most cases. And then you should treat differently the situation where you have static content that you want to make public, maybe part of your website, and I either have a dedicated account for that, because it doesn't cost anything to have another account, or use CloudFront to front that static content. What other security services we want to use? So there's a bunch of them, but I kind of put what I thought are the main ones. So CloudTrail, definitely should enable it. The first one is free, and you can have a global one. And this kind of covers a lot of the visibility into what happens in your account. What credential, what the identities are doing, what objects were created, and that sort of thing. And ideally, you would grab this and you put it in some sort of security monitoring. You might want to use this to monitor spend as well, and you might be using for billing and some other purposes. Then GuardDuty is a pretty inexpensive tool that you can enable. It's sort of a light intrusion detection system. It uses behind the scene some data from CloudTrail, from VPC flows, so network flows, the DNS, and it has some S3 access detection, and it uses all this to trigger alerts and you can optionally decide that you can have auto remediation to these alerts, or you can just forward them to your monitoring system and then action when they're triggered. And if you haven't used this, just enable it. The only component that might present additional cost for you is probably the S3, but whenever you enable guard duty, the first 30 days are free. So you can just use it at your leisure and figure out what works for you and what doesn't. And if you haven't used it before and you enable it, I guarantee you it will find something weird. It will find probably a VM that has SSH open from the internet and people are trying like crazy to guess the password. It might find some identities which are having like weird behavior, and you might decide that if that's correct behavior or not. And another service where that can help you at the network layer are the VPC flows. These are like network flows from everything that happens on the like EC2, so everything that happens to and from your servers, and they're really interesting to be used in an SIEM for correlations. And another service, if you use EC2 instances, if you use servers, is the AWS Inspector. So this is an agent that you install on the servers, and it's a lightweight compliance and vulnerability agent and service. So it will allow you to see whether you have missing patches on the supporting operating systems, and also it uses a number of compliance standards to show you whether your configuration is diverging from the security best practices, and then you can choose what to do with these findings. At a bare minimum, you can just use the reports and do manual remediation, but it also has integration into various automations, and you can find on the internet various ways that people automated this to auto patch or auto remediate and other scenarios. And then there's a full list of services at this link that I recommend you guys to browse. It might be something interesting that can really save you a lot of time by from the detection side, as well as automating and reacting to security alerts. All right. We also have some. I put here some open source tools and also some additional reading. So these are pretty interesting. I've used a bunch of these, and I recommend you to browse them because it might save you a lot of time. So, for example, Prowler, assuming you haven't enabled AWS config, Prowler is a good way to do an initial compliance check of your accounts. It has a set of scripts that it runs on your account with some permissions, and then it shows you the objects that might have security related issues, and you might want to do something about it. Cloud Custodian is something similar. Skyarc, we already talked about it. It detects the admins and shadow admins. People are generating lists of these open source tools. I recommend you to check them out. And then AWS has a great deal of documentation. So if you decided you're serious about security, you might have a person allocated to this to do it full time. If you're a startup, have them check this out because it's great. All right. Some other suggestions, and this kind of depends on the maturity level of your company, But what I would recommend is ensure that you start encrypting everything from the beginning, which can be a bit of a hassle. So for example, if you want to read an S3 bucket cross accounts, if you enable encryption, you then need to ensure that you enable cross account KMS access so that whoever reads that bucket can also get the encryption key and so on. So it kind of takes a bit longer to, at the beginning to master. It is really beneficial because later it's much harder to add it. So for example, you have, your business grew, you now have a client and the client asks you to have encryption. So like porting encryption later, it's a bit of a pain. And then pretty much any compliance certification that you want to achieve will ask you to have encryption. So you just spend the time at the beginning to enable it because it's easier. And then a lot of people forget about this, but you do need to back up your data. And ideally, you won't back up your data in the same account. Just put it in a different account altogether. And if it's an account that is completely separated from your organization, and you only put it to put data in, and no one can access it except in emergencies, that's even better, because there have been situations where attackers have deleted an entire account for a business, and then the make or break of that business becomes do you have a backup of that data or not. And there's some other tricks you can use here. There's I think with Redshift and also S3 archiving policies, you can make it so that data cannot be deleted as long as the account is not deleted itself. So there's a lot of ways to do backup. There's even an AWS backup service that you can leverage now. And I recommend you to think about this carefully, because it's easy to mess up things in the cloud, right? You have a misconfigured Terraform template, or like an attack, you can end up with a non-functional account. So you need to have ideally you would have the recipe, the Terraform scripts on how to rebuild it, and also the data on backup so that you can restore your data to some earlier point. And then this one, like a bit more tactical approaches, is to ensure that you follow the buzz around AWS security. There's a bunch of security researchers that continuously come up with new tools, with news, with AWS itself comes up with new services. So you might want to watch that. And then finally, to ensure that you have your contact details under your account in AWS. Sometimes AWS will call you or email you if they think you are under attack, or that somebody had compromised your account and it's being used for bad things. So you want to ensure that they can reach out to you so that you can fix the problem. All right, so in my last slide, before the Q&A, I wanted to show a couple of publicized security incidents in AWS, and some of the follow-up. So in the first one, there was this company called CodeSpaces, which was helping other companies adopt the cloud and make the transition to the cloud. And they had leaked access keys to their account or accounts, and the attacker took over their account and asked for ransom in cryptocurrency. So they didn't want to pay the ransom, and they were starting to work with AWS to regain access to their account. The attacker figured that one out because they were looking at the CloudTrail logs or something similar, and before they could restore their account, the attacker deleted the entire account or accounts. And so the company went out of business because they didn't have backup, they didn't have a disaster recovery strategy, and they lost everything. And AWS cannot undelete an account for you. There's not a recycle bin for your account. If it's deleted, you lose it. So all the objects in it are purged. Another very visible hack, let's say, was for Capital One, which is an American bank, where because they had a vulnerable proxy, or let's say an insecure proxy, an attacker could convince the proxy to fetch the EC2 role credentials from the machine. Then the attacker used these credentials remotely to connect to the account and see what permissions it had. And unfortunately, it had permissions to read all the S3 buckets. And it was able to download the financial and personal details of up to 100 million customers, which was, like probably the biggest leak at that time, and a big embarrassment for Capital One, which was the poster child for AWS on adopting cloud services. They were featured in most of the AWS reInvent. They were the flagship customer that turned their business and made it very much AWS centric. And then finally, the S3, the public S3 bucket, a string of events, so that I mentioned earlier. This is just one instance, but there have been tens and tens of headlines with companies that they had insecure buckets that shouldn't have been public, and they had customer information, they had private information there about their financials and that sort of stuff. And the idea is, if you follow the security best practices, if you ensure that you protect your credentials, that you restrict permissions, that you enable backup and you have a disaster recovery strategy, that you patch and perform compliance on all your assets, both at the server level as well as the cloud object level, and you ensure that the storage accounts are not public by mistake, you wouldn't be in this list, and you would have a pretty good security posture, which you can build to go into the higher value added security functions like behavioral monitoring and threat hunting and the fancier stuff. But this is the basis, and if you need to get the base right. Okay, and that was it. That was the content. I think we still have plenty of time. Oh, right on time. So we have 20 minutes. I would be interested in questions and feedback, comments. Whatever feedback you wanna give.
You can write a question in preguntas and respuestas.
Alternatively, we can give you guys back 20 minutes to have a coffee, prepare for the next call, or if you're done with the day, just enjoy the afternoon.
One question, and if someone has a specific question next to the event, can they contact you on LinkedIn? How come people can contact you for a specific question? We have a question from Mark, Daniel. Is there any special consideration for securing Amazon Web Services Lambda exposed to a public API gateway? Daniel, did you get the question?
Oh yeah, I was talking on mute. That's the danger of doing this on Zoom. Yeah, this is good stuff, Mark. So definitely this is an interesting problem, and we see more applications moving to the microservices. So you start having a bunch of APIs that might not be secure. So you can use API gateways, and I think also a combination of AWS config to enforce conditions on the APIs themselves. So you can enforce, for example, that only authenticated APIs are accepted, and you decide how that is being done. So I think the API gateway itself offers this capability, and you can additionally review it with config. And if you want to do a compliance check to see how it goes, I think Prowler has a module on the API gateways, and it will show you insecure configurations for that.
So we have another question from Bastien.
I see another question from Bastian. Have you encountered any limitations in terms of available security functionalities on AWS? Yeah, so AWS surprised me in a way that whenever they came up with their services, it's fair to say that their services are fairly bare minimum of what you would expect. So their security groups are a stateful firewall, but like a layer 4 stateful firewall. And so it can feel that they're pretty bare and doesn't have the the luxurious features of standalone security tools. But I think it makes a lot of sense if you do things at scale. So, and this bare minimum combined cleverly can actually do the job done without additional complexity and without incurring any sort of like operational penalties from running third-party software and running your own servers and that sort of thing. Typically, what I've seen companies doing when they're not happy with the security components of AWS, rather than putting things like VMs inside it, they're solving lots of the missing capabilities using something like CDN, content delivery networks, something like Akamai or what was the other one? CloudForge. I think I forget the name. And you can add a lot of security capabilities there because you can put things like denial of service protection. You can use web application firewalls, and this kind of allows you to build on top of what AWS has without sacrificing the benefit of going in the cloud, which is infrastructure as a code and using cloud native services.
Okay, so we have also a question from Xavi about money on cost.
Yeah, so Xavi is trying to find out how much should we spend on security relative to revenue, and what's the minimum viable security investment? Yeah, and I think Xavi, that's not that's not a recipe that I don't know if there's a formula like this, but how can I answer this? I would say that you should see security as a business enabler. So security allows you to deploy and run your business at scale. If you haven't done your security right, you will be concerned, you will be cautious. If you have, deployed security monitoring and compliance controls, and you have encryption, and you maintain your identities, and you then have the liberty and the peace of mind to go bold, to go faster. And then from this point, I don't see this security as a sort of a just adding friction to the business. I see security as a business enabler. If you have security right, you can just go top speed, right? And I think a friend of mine had the perfect analogy for this, and I'll steal it from him. And that is, think of security as the brakes on a car, right? If you don't have brakes, you will go rather slow, because you cannot, you won't be able to prevent an impact. If you have brakes, then you can go pretty fast, because when you need it, you apply the brakes. So that's kind of in the way security security can help the business. Now, in even like a more detailed answer, I would say you need to understand your risk exposure, and whatever industry or business you are, there are other people like you that are asking the same question. So go on Reddit, go on forums, security forums, and ask an advice. And I think in this industry, what I really like about the security industry, people are genuinely nice and eager to help. They don't necessarily, they don't look down on you. They understand, that you might not have money to fund a cybersecurity program, a full cybersecurity program, or have somebody dedicated for security. And depending on your case, they will help you with suggestions. And by the way, I can also help you with some suggestions, and whoever needs them. If you contact me by LinkedIn, I can understand a bit better the setup and provide some more kind of useful answers.
Then thank you, Daniel. Then we have a question from Juanjo. Do you know Cloud Lab from Reno Security?
Yes, yes. Juanjo,
what do you think? What do you think about it?
I haven't used it, but I think it's useful. So these are useful when you have a cybersecurity team and you need to train them, and you want them to do, threat hunting. You want to prep them for the probably, likely scenario that at some point in time you will get hacked. And so this is a good tool to teach your existing cybersecurity team, if you have one, what are common issues, what are common weaknesses, and then they can use this information to improve, the tools and the cybersecurity program that is already there. Like, compliance. Are we missing some of the compliance control? Are we missing some monitorization? Are we ignoring guard duty events? Are we not taking full use of CloudTrail data? Yeah, you're welcome, Xavi.
Do we have any more questions for Daniel? Okay, because I think I can end the session. So thank you very much for your time. I will share your contact with attendees, also the slides and the replay. So thank you, Daniel, for the webinar, and thank you all for attending the event. See you soon, and keep safe.
Thank you guys. Take care. Appreciate
Bye.
your time.